Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. Lots to get to today. First of all, some very revelatory documents released revealing some new links that we did not specifically know about between Saudi and the 9/11 hijackers. Former President George W. Bush gave a big speech that was predictably horrific. We've got new information about that final drone strike in Afghanistan. There were already indications that a bunch of civilians were murdered in that drone strike. Of course, the military was lying, saying, oh, we got this great ISIS target.
Total lie.
But they would never tell us who it was, so this was always suspicious from the start. New York Times went and they dug deep and they revealed exactly what happened on that day. We'll give you all of the details there. Also, some new commentary from Joe Manchin about what he will and won't support in terms of that reconciliation bill. Matt Stoller is going to be on with the way that companies and CEOs profited off of 9/11 at a time when the country was suffering. They put their greed first. Not that that will be any big surprise to you. But we wanted to start this morning with Biden's big announcement last week on Thursday, taking a much more aggressive approach to getting people vaccinated. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
So tonight, I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated.
So he frames this as, this isn't about freedom or personal choice. This is about keeping people safe. Just let me walk you through the details of what exactly he announced in this speech and the executive orders that he's pushing here moving forward. He's going to, these measures will affect tens of millions of Americans, include mandatory coronavirus vaccination for all federal employees and contractors, vaccine mandates for workers at businesses with 100 or more employees. And basically what's going to happen there, and that's the biggest piece of news, is that if you are a business with 100 or more employees, either your employees have to get vaccinated or they have to submit to testing on a weekly basis. In addition, requiring mandatory paid time off for those businesses so that workers can go and get the shots and recover for them. That's definitely a good thing. Also, leveraging the federal government's power with Medicare and Medicaid funding to require immunization for workforces at health facilities that take Medicare and Medicaid funding. So those are sort of the details. As I said, the big piece here that people are really focused on is that mandate for businesses with 100 or more employees that says either your employees have to get vaccinated or they have to submit to a weekly coronavirus test. A little bit about the legal justification here. We've got a New York Times tear sheet for you. So because this isn't the federal government directly requiring vaccinations, the legal justification is based on the act that established the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. Essentially, there's a provision there that says that if there's something that poses a grave risk to employees, then you can require workplaces to do something about it. The way this will happen is it won't go into effect immediately. The federal government has basically sent over to OSHA this language requiring them to write up the rules. They're going to have to demonstrate that workers face a grave danger, that the rule is necessary to diffuse that danger, and that it is feasible for employers to carry out. Of course, Republican governors already losing their minds over this, threatening to sue. And, you know, I think based on a lot of the legal experts, we have a tear sheet showing just those Republican governors threatening to sue. You see Ron DeSantis there. I know Texas Governor Greg Abbott also.
I think 6 states now.
6 states. Kristi Noem, I think, got in on the act, et cetera, et cetera. No big surprise there. A lot of the legal analysis seems to indicate that he's on relatively firm footing here. But you just never know. It all depends on what the courts ultimately decide, Saagar.
No, you're right. And this is this is a deep fine that they would be imposing. So this, per the New York Times, $13,650 fine for a violation, $136,500 for those that are willful or repeated. And it's a very dicey territory. Now, I actually had thought that the law might be illegal, but after we talked yesterday, I went back and I looked, and you're right, which is that under OSHA, they have an emergency temporary standard that they can adhere to. And as long as the process goes through an administrative review as per the Administration Procedures Act, as long as they don't screw up like the Trump administration often used to do, don't get me started on that one.
People may be slightly more competent.
Correct. Then what they have to do is the law will go into effect, essentially. But then it will, of course, get kicked to the courts. Now, look, in terms of whether it passes judicial muster or not, it's complicated. Justice John Roberts, actually struck down the past administration for not adhering specifically to that act and going through the exact legal motions. So as long as the Biden administration— that was on the census and as well on DACA. So on those particular cases, the standard has basically been set, right? So what it would mean here is that if the Biden administration does dot all of its I's and cross its T's, that this very could be legal. Of course, given the court and the makeup of that, it is very difficult to tell. And so, if you're one of those Republicans who's outraged about this, I would not necessarily bank on the illegality or whatever. I had no idea, and I admit this is what makes me deeply uncomfortable. I did not know the government could basically do this. And the way that I've seen some of the defense is like, well, it's not technically a vaccine mandate. It's like, yeah, well, what business on earth wants to give you paid time off to be able to go and get tested all of the time? Because the paid time off, it doesn't just apply to people for recovering from the shot. If you're one of those employees or one of those businesses who had an employee where you didn't have one who wanted to get vaccinated, it basically becomes a cost on you because you have to keep giving them PTO to go get tested every couple of days. So it's a kind of a de facto mandate.
Well, some of those rules, it will depend on how it's written by OSHA. But I will tell you, and we'll get into more of, what I think about it, what you think about it and the politics of it, but that is part of what makes me a lot more comfortable with this because it's not actually a direct vaccine mandate. I think what I've always said is there's a balance here between two competing principles. One is your individual rights, your civil liberties, something that's really important. I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea of starting to, fire people en masse who are unwilling to get vaccinated. On the other hand, we live in a society together and we have a responsibility to one another.
Right.
And choosing not to get vaccinated is not a costless decision for the people around you. So for me, the way that this has been presented, and again, we'll see how it's written up ultimately by OSHA and how it's implemented, what it looks like in the business community once they actually implement it. The way this was written up balances those two principles really well because you're saying to people, look, you don't want to get vaccinated? That's fine. Submit to a test every week. That seems to me to be the best possible way of striking that balance between, listen, I think everybody should get vaccinated, but if you decide for whatever reason you don't want to, you're not going to get fired. You have another alternative to pursue. To me, that's why this thing ultimately makes sense. I will say on the legal piece, I'll just throw this one more layer on top of here. Biden seems totally almost like bring it on in terms of the legal fight, and I think also the political fight on this. Here was his response to a question about those Republican governors planning to sue.
Are calling your vaccine requirements an overreach. You are threatening to challenge it in court.
Have at it. Look, I am so disappointed that particularly some Republican governors have been so cavalier with the health of these kids, so cavalier with the health of their communities.
I think part of the problem there, Krystal, which is that kind of forceful attitude, and look, Trump did many of the same things. Biden is very much leaning into that style of politics. This is part of what I worry about the most, which is, as you said, look, if it really does get implemented that way, then I think it'd be okay. But what I worry about the most is what United Airlines is doing. Is they're like, look, you're fired unless you get vaccinated by September 13. And then, look, I get it, flight attendants, a little bit different, but then at the same time, like transmission in the air, not necessarily the same thing. I think that really what it comes down to, it's all about affect. And in that speech that he declared at the very top, the pandemic of these people are, it was very much like an articulation of a declaration of war, at least the way that I saw it, and a lot of people did. And if you're going to use that affect and then the full force of the law, I just worry, look, I think we're shredding social trust even more so. Ultimately, and look, I'm not saying that coronavirus isn't terrible and hasn't killed a lot of people and so much more, but we have a vaccine. It will protect you from hospitalization and death by and large. And if you don't want to get it, then that's your choice. And you could make the decision to say, okay, so be it. We're going to move on from here. And that, or at the very least, lean more into the incentive programs. And look, some incentives are not always going to work, but this whole war footing by the president, by the administration, then using the full force of the law, that is what I worry about the most. And it's not even about civil liberties necessarily.
Yeah.
It's like the affect of it. I mean, I saw organic outrage on this at a scale that I'd never seen in a really long time. To your point, though, that we were talking previously, it did kind of fizzle out over 9/11. A lot of people, they make a lot of noise about something. Will this really be something? One tell to me was that Governor Asa Hutchinson, who is Arkansas, much more of like a bit more of a libertarian type, but in the Republican, coalition, seen very much as a squish, like somebody who's going to go along, whatever. Even he is against it. So like I see this totally united in terms of the political party, and it's about to become now some sort of like culture war issue where I'm like, look, if your ultimate goal is getting vaccinated, I just don't think that this is going to be the right thing to do. We've covered that Kaiser Family Foundation poll. Yeah. About 40% of workers said they would quit if there's a vaccine mandate.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, they don't have to get the vaccine.
Oh, you're right.
They can get tested. And and here's the thing is, look, I just don't think that it's arguable that it won't work, right? We can argue about whether the trade-offs are worth it.
Yeah.
That's a reasonable argument. But we've already seen federal government agencies have had a similar either get vaccinated or get tested regime in place. They're seeing a lot of people get vaccinated. It has increased the number of vaccinations. You can also look overseas. In France, they put in much more stringent actual vaccine mandates, not just for workplaces, but also just to be able to go out to dinner and things like that. It's worked. A lot more people have gotten vaccinated.
Very true.
This is part of why the U.S. is now lagging behind almost every other developed country in terms of vaccination rates at this point, and it's lagging behind almost every other developed country in terms of these types of vaccine requirements. So I don't really think it's arguable that it doesn't work. I think we can talk about the trade-offs, and that's a reasonable debate here. Listen, to me, the politics of this also are pretty clear, and I think this is why he's so sort of confident. I would dispute that his speech, I saw a lot of hand-wringing about the language in his speech. I would dispute that this was any sort of like the war on the unvaccinated type of approach. The things that I find completely abhorrent are these people, Leanna Wen, who's saying like you should be barred from from going out in public at all.
Right.
The people,
you don't
this
have
is the
a right
one
to interstate travel. Or
right.
whatever.
Don't have right, exactly.
Crazy?
Or the doctor we keep talking about. Went on MSNBC and was like, deny them care if they're unvaccinated. Like to me, that is psychopathic. It's completely out of bounds, and the whole attitude of contempt, judgment towards the unvaccinated, I have absolutely no use for. I didn't think that he got to that in that speech. I think that he stated the facts. Look, this group of people, unvaccinated people, are creating risks for all of us. That's just factually accurate.
Mostly themselves.
It's just true, but for all of us. And look, I mean, there is a cost when, especially knowing now how common breakthrough infections are, there's a huge cost for people in terms of getting sick, having to quarantine for 2 weeks, loss of being able to work, and especially, listen, if you're a white-collar worker, if it's one thing. If you're a blue-collar worker, if you're a service worker, that can completely upend your life in and of itself.
True.
So there are tremendous costs that are being imposed on vaccinated people by the unvaccinated, and that's not to like shame them or say you're terrible people and you should be shunned and denied medical care and all of that. That's just the facts of the matter. And there are, in fact, instances now where the ICU beds are so full in states like Alabama that people are actually being denied critical care. There's a story just down about a man in Alabama who was having in distress cardiac arrest, and there was no ICU bed available for him within like 200 miles, and he died. So these are real costs that are in fact being imposed. I don't think that it goes too far just to state that simple fact. On the politics of it, we haven't gotten any polling yet on the specifics of Biden's moves here, but we had some late August polling asking people, how do you feel about requiring vaccines, which is even, again, further than what Biden's doing, but requiring vaccines for people who are working in person. We can throw that. This is CBS News up on the screen. So a majority supports that. Those are the numbers at the top. It might be a little bit hard to see, but a bare majority supports that, and only 26% are opposed. The remaining 23% are undecided. So listen, at this point in this country, you've got about 70% of eligible adults who have gotten at least one shot. The unvaccinated are in a decided minority. Then you take from that group the people who are really hardcore against this direction. I think Biden and the Democrats feel like they are on very solid political footing at this point. And I think they're calculating that whatever backlash they receive here ultimately, the thing that people really care about is how is the pandemic going, period. Like, you know, even if there was a backlash, but the pandemic got under control and you were seeing better results and people are feeling more optimistic, I think they believe that politically that's a better state of affairs.
I think you're right. And I think the bigger issue, and you know, look, we have a very diverse audience here.
Yeah.
And what I had heard, you know, specifically, and I think this is a very legitimate question, is around natural immunity. Now we've seen a lot of different studies that have come out. Natural immunity may even give you more of a protection against coronavirus than a vaccine. That is not me saying go out and get coronavirus. You know, if you haven't had it, getting a vaccine is still a pretty good idea. Yes, you may still get it. But again, overall, in the aggregate, number one on symptoms, number two on, in the aggregate, it will reduce your chance of infection and of spreading that infection critically. So all of that together. That being said, they clearly didn't think about it at all. And this is probably one of those things where you see them not you see them with their one-size-fits-all solution. A size-fits-all solution I generally agree with, but are not really willing to engage as much with some of the counters, which I do think are important. To me, it's all about trust. You got to gain people's trust. This is one of the most common questions. And Dr. Fauci did not have an answer to this when he was out there defending the vaccine, you know, not mandate, whatever the Biden administration policy is. Sanjay Gupta actually pressed him on it on CNN. Let's take a listen to that.
There was a study that came out of Israel about natural immunity, and basically the headline was that natural immunity provides a lot of protection, even better than the vaccines alone. What are people to make of that? So as we talk about vaccine mandates, I get calls all the time. People say, I've already had COVID, I'm protected, and now the study says maybe even more protected than the vaccine alone. Should they also get the vaccine? How do you make the case to them?
You know, that's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that.
I think they do need to have an answer on that. That's actually a critical one in particular. And you know, if you're somebody who's had COVID, not vaccinated, then maybe it should be different than somebody who's completely unvaccinated.
Yeah.
Again, and you got to have answers to these questions. You're going to have such a wide swath. Now, look, I think you're right, which is that as long as people aren't getting fired, I'm not as uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
The moment I start to see mass firings, I'm really, you know, really worried, because I think we already saw there's a hospital which had to pause deliveries of babies because they have many nurses who are not vaccinated and refuse to do it.
You know what? In
And
a
that one
hospital
is-
setting,
yeah.
get the frickin' vaccine.
I don't disagree with you.
Honestly, I mean,
Yeah, especially
listen,
nursing homes. That one is
nursing homes, hospital,
yeah.
you're dealing with newborn babies here. I mean, come on, right? I agree with you.
Yeah.
If we had a hard vaccine mandate at every workplace across this country and you're seeing mass firings, we know who that would disproportionately impact. It's the working class, right? Working class, at this point, mostly working class white people.
Yep.
But we're talking about lower income people who are disproportionately impacted, and that's something to really strongly consider and be very concerned about. If you work in a hospital, if you work in a nursing home, if you work in a school, yes, I think you should be required to get a vaccine at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out. On the natural immunity thing, if you've had COVID, and the studies do show that it provides you with a high level of immunity equivalent or even superior to a vaccine, it's probably just would be hard to implement.
It would be.
Right?
Well,
because you don't
antibodies
get
are more,
you know, you get your little vaccine passport showing your dates, but I guess you'd have to start distributing, like, I've had COVID.
We could do antibody
passports,
tests,
right?
Like you can do antibodies. But again, I don't even really want this sort of immunity passport type thing. But if we're going to go in that direction, I do actually think that's
They
probably
should have
what
some
we should
sort of
have.
answer, though,
I
rather than
completely
just like,
agree. They have to have an answer. You can't just say like, oh, well, whatever. I mean, that's millions and millions of people. We actually have no idea. I mean, I never reported my case to the government. There's a lot of people who are just like me. Yeah, don't come after me, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right.
At the same time, so we'll continue to track that one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.